Privacy is a super exciting topic, but no, it isn't. I saw some people nodding. Don't nod. Privacy is horribly boring. So let's try to make it fun tonight by bringing some of the audience into it and some of the other areas. So it's going to be a world tour. We're going to talk about privacy here in Canada, Bill C-27, Law 25 in Quebec. We're going to talk about privacy legislation and AI legislation in the US, which is state by state. There is no federal overarching controls. And we're going to talk about some of the rest of the world as well. So it should be fun. I've come to the conclusion now, whenever I come and do these sessions, that whenever I was young and I started doing presentations back in my 20s, were some of my first ones that I got to do in front of big groups of people, much bigger. But the first one that I did was the World Congress for IT, and there were 3,000 people at that event, and I was speaking about WiMAX, which was a fixed broadband wireless standard. And it scared me to the point where now I'm considerably more comfortable presenting, although I still get a little bit nervous every now and then. It was interesting because Colin Powell was the MC at that event. And then it was me, 20-some-year-old right out of university, coming up to talk about a standard that was being released for rural connectivity. Credivera is my company. We'll talk about that for just a minute or two, really quick. So Credivera works in the digital identity space. So we're workforce identity. We're focused on everything that a person needs from a training perspective, identity perspective, background checks, drug and alcohol testing, you name it, to do their job at any given time. So one of the biggest causes of accidents and death on the workplace is lack of training. So if somebody gets into a crane who doesn't have their crane operator's license, and all of a sudden you've got a big piece of rebar through somebody who's walking by that jump suit. So being able to actually ensure that all of your people do have that training that they need becomes very important, and we verify the source. So all of that data comes directly from the provider of that training, of which we're confirming that that individual has that training, but also that the person who provided it can provide that training for what they need to do. So we're headquartered here in Calgary. We've been around since 2018. We're just over 20 people. We do work with high-risk profile workforce, which is kind of where we started. Calgary. Oil and gas, we would say. Right? Construction, mining. I'm doing a webinar to the mining industry about safety first and keeping everyone alive next week. Again, we do digital identity management. That's everything from credentials, so your WIMS, you're working in enclosed spaces, your H2S. But it also extends to you as an individual, a foundational identity. As we see more and more foundational identities becoming digitized, everything from mobile driver's licenses down in the US, to EIDAS in Europe, to foundational identities here. BC is one of the first to actually release a verifiable credential for a person's identity. And we're going to see more and more of that. We're the world's first open exchange for verifiable credentials, where we provide the rails and the platform so that all of these different organizations that are issuers can issue those verifiable credentials in a format that can be verified by everybody who needs to verify it, allowing for selective disclosure. I'll talk about selective disclosure a little bit later on, but that speaks to sovereign identity and you being the individual who controls who sees what, when, and how much. So, it's really the triangle. We're connecting an employer, an issuer, and a credential holder fundamentally at the end of the day. And that can be a variety of different players. It could be an issuer as a private organization. So think a Chevron who's doing site training for their employees coming in. We can enable them to issue that site training to those individuals so that it is traceable, and those individuals now have control over that credential and the truck. Or it could be a licensing body. Any licensing body at all, like the mortgage brokers here who are now licensed by RECA in Alberta. Those licenses can be released as verified credential into those mortgage brokers' wallets, which can be used and paired with their foundational identity to ensure that you don't see fraud like we saw in Ontario and BC earlier this year, where people were mortgaging houses that they didn't own. Disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I do sales and marketing. I'm a revenue officer. I was a CTO for 8 years prior to being a CRO, so feel free to ask technical questions too. But I am not a lawyer, so anything about privacy changes I talk about tonight, do not base your company's privacy policies and rules on them. Simply use what I say and dig deeper yourself, and always talk to the folks who are lawyers. So the evolution of privacy has been very interesting over the last little while, especially around the world, with 128 countries enacting different legislations. So if you're a software startup and you're selling your stuff online, being able to regionalize your software becomes very important from a privacy perspective. Interoperability is driving a lot of these changes in industry, from e-identities, mobile driver's licenses, etc. So think about it. You have your mobile driver's license provided to you in Arizona. You drive across the border to Vegas, and you're speeding, cop pulls you over, you pull out your EID from Arizona. How do they verify that that's actually a valid driver's license issued by the state of Arizona if they're using a different standard in Nevada than we have in Arizona? California data protection law, and I was chatting about this earlier, it is probably the most advanced enacted privacy law today. So if you are going to be doing anything in the realm of privacy and working with privately identifiable information, if you follow California, you're going to be safe in the vast majority of regions around the world. That being said, it's a little bit older, so it is the most advanced enacted. It's not the most advanced that is currently in reading.
So Robert, two questions. So what is the difference between the legislation and data protection law?
So the California data protection law has already passed.
Okay.
It's in place, it's being enforced today.
Okay.
So you do something that's against that law, California can come after you, they can fine your company, all the fun stuff that's associated to it. Here in Canada, we've got two. We've got Bill C-27 and Law 25. Law 25 is in law. It's in place today, it's enacted, not completely. So they did it as a phased approach over years. The last phase comes into play in September of this year, 2024. The second phase was deployed in September of 2023. That law is only in Quebec. Quebec actually implemented their privacy law ahead of the rest of Canada, which is Bill C-27. Whenever Bill C-27 actually passes, then it would become a law. Bill C-27 is two legislations combined, one around data privacy, one around AI. Because of the interweave between those two, it's taking much, much longer to pass Bill C-27 than it would have had they split AI from data privacy. Because you think about it right now, your privacy and data here in Canada currently is protected by CompTIA. Who knows when CompTIA came out?
Early 2000s.
Keep going. Most of you weren't born when CompTIA came out. Looking at the audience, I'm old, and I've come to this conclusion that I'm old, as I see over 20 years of experience in things. But it came out when it was first written in the recent late 80s. So, think about that for a second. Data privacy controlled by a law that was passed in the late 80s. You'll get like a $50 fine if you take someone's data and sell it on the street. So some of the global drivers around this law and some of the things that are being enacted as legislation is digital identity and new standards for sharing information becoming more and more prevalent. Think about it in your daily interactions when you go online. How many times do you sign up for a new service or sign up for a new website and it's logging with Google, logging with Facebook? Every time you click that button, you're sharing your information that you created with Google and you created with Facebook in order to log you into a news site. Have you ever seen a secondary follow-up question? Share my information for login. What information do you want to share? Very infrequent. So right now in the United States, it's the Fair Credit Reporting Act. That's not new either. The California CCPA, which is pretty good, as I mentioned earlier. Canada, we're talking about it's coming due. In Europe, GDPR, which is nearly as good as California. So Europe has become more advanced with their data privacy regulations and legislations. Data privacy becomes hugely important, especially around data breaches. And I know that Tim is going to talk about AI later and some of the scams that are coming out from AI. not necessarily related to this, and the people who are doing the hacks and the people who are doing bad things typically don't tend to follow legislation whenever they're setting up their hacks. Whenever somebody calls me and says, I'm from the CRA, you owe us money, etc. Right? You know. But movement towards control of personal information is super important, and the decentralization of that data is even more important. Because if your data is all in one central location, if that central location gets hacked, now it's not just going to be your data that is available, it's going to be everyone's data that's available. Fully decentralized data from a credential and identity perspective puts that data in your control. You're the only one who has access to it. It's on your device. It's decentralized. It's no longer in the cloud. The only pieces that are in the cloud are the digital signatures of the issuer that is on that document, and your digital signature as a holder that's on that document. Those two digital signatures are available in a trust registry where everybody can confirm that the issuer is the issuer and you're the holder. The data inside of it, though, is yours, fully decentralized. I'm going to talk about the US a little bit, not a lot, but this is eye-opening. Data breaches in the US. Who's had their credit card hacked? Anybody? No? In fact, mine hacked too. But there's a lot of compromises out there in the data space. Right? So we talk about big data. Big data is great because with big data we can do things. And with AI and some of the tools that are coming available, now we can actually make use of that data. Whereas in the past, we had all the data, we couldn't really make use of it because it was just too much. We couldn't really deal with it as a human. Now we can make use of it. So these data breaches are becoming more and more important because people who are actually taking that data can make use of it, right? They're now taking this data, they can make algorithms of it. They can do deep fake. Are you talking deep fake later? I hope you are.
Yes.
Excellent, all right, I won't talk about that. But some of the bigger ones have been cyber attacks on not just your personal data, but device data as well. So you look at Ontario and a few of the hospitals out there that have been hacked in the last year, those hospitals lost a lot of their access to the things that they just took for granted, like digital prescription services. And I've had first-person stories of friends that I have in Ontario who have prescription medication, and they went to the doctor and they got the prescription, but the doctor couldn't actually issue it in a digital fashion. They become so used to these systems that they issue the prescription to the person without a signature. They never sign it. They don't need to sign it, it's digital. They have that all available online. Well, whenever you don't have it available online, and you go back to the old school ways of doing things, that signature needs to be there. If that signature isn't there, they think that you're committing fraud and trying to steal drugs from the pharmacy whenever you bring it in. So it was a little bit of a problem. A lot of the diagnostic machinery, anything IoT, and everything is connected now, one way or another. There was a story recently about toothbrushes. There was a vulnerability in a toothbrush that could actually post a worm into your network in your house whenever you connected it, because you're just clicking, right? Accept, connect, connect. I can now make my toothbrush do things with my phone, yay! You can't control it. So healthcare is huge, financial services, credit cards, huge. Everything in between, massive. The pipeline in the eastern US that got hacked. And all of the issues that caused around our oil supply, gas, everything else. So, the US is taking a federal approach. Biden-Harris is trying to announce a national cybersecurity strategy, which is the pillar. This is where it starts from legislation perspective. You say, this is what we want to be whenever we grow up. This is the rules that we want to put in place. This is how the legislation should be enacted. But fundamentally, one of their strategic objectives is a digital identity ecosystem. So, privacy-preserving, consent-based digital identity solutions. Making sure that fraud goes away, and actually controlling those pieces of metadata that are part of your digital identity. Think about it. You go to the bar and you say, hey, I want to get a beer. You hand over your driver's license. What's on your driver's license? It doesn't just have a green check mark that says you can buy a beer. It has your eye color, your weight, your home address, your everything. And being able to digitize some of these foundational pieces of identity that now allows you to have control over what pieces are shared when, specifically for the purpose that the data is being used for, nothing else. So supporting this in the US is going to be really, really interesting. Current challenges, big three, but microsecurity, privacy, consent, fraud, inequity, inefficiency, rising identity theft, data breaches. These are all things that are coming into play day after day after day, and it's not changing. Yes?
What inequity is in these countries?
Inequity is access to that form of protection. So in the US and Canada and everywhere else, it's less in a first world country than in a third world country. But if I'm a homeless person, I should have the same access to the verifiable credentials and digital identity piece that the doctor next door does. And I should be able to control my data regardless of what level I am in that society. So that's the inequity we speak to in the US. Mobile driver's license, MDL. So, adoption of MDL is at an inflection point in the US. I was talking about the Arizona driving across to Nevada. It's not just there. These are all the states that currently have MDL available to their citizens. So this is something that can be claimed. It is not necessary anywhere yet to have an MDL. So you can spend a physical copy and a mobile driver's license. And you can store it inside of whatever wallet that you happen to use that actually manages that standard. Apple and Google are both working on it. I'm not sure if they've released it. The states themselves have laws that are freely available to the citizens in order to improve that inequity that we're seeing. But that being said, there's nothing saying that it has to be the same standard in any state or any jurisdiction. So whenever you have two conflicting standards, and one is trying to verify a driver's license from the other jurisdiction, you can run into problems at a fundamental operational level. Where we're going to see the standard becoming more and more prevalent and becoming something that can be verified and issued in the same way across state, across region, across country, across everything, is with some of the standards and regulations that the ICAO is putting in place for international travel. Right? Think about your passport. If every country used a different standard for their passport, international travel gets trickling fast. And ICAO is actually based in Montreal. It's a UN-based organization that has a lot of standards around that. And something more interesting is the number of physical licenses and ID cards in the US and Canada. So we've got 100 million of them from a company called TALIS. Used to be Gibraltar. Anybody who's been in that space before? TALIS bought Gibraltar back, gosh, quite a few years ago now. And that's passports as well as physical IDs. They also do payment checks inside their credit cards. US privacy, it's done state by state. So this is an interesting graphic because on the right was the status back in June of 2023, and here are the changes to December of 2023. So in a 6-month period, you can see exactly the number of states that have changed legislation, released new legislation, enacted what they had in progress. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in 6 months releasing privacy regulations and legislations. So again, they're all different. State by state right now, you're going to be penalized by the state. So when you have a company and you do something wrong and Texas decides to go after you and fine you, it might not just be Texas, it might be California, it might be Colorado, it might be Utah, it might be a combination thereof of all. And here are all of them, and I'm assuming that Tim will make this presentation available to you around the fact.
Yes.
So there's a lot of this in here, deeper dive into and not going to get into some of that. Now, California didn't stop. So like I said, they were one of the best from an enacted privacy legislation perspective. They're still releasing more laws around data privacy, how it's being used, how it varies by age, what AI means, and how AI comes into play. So this one is one of the newest ones, and it's the delete act. And this is an interesting one because it, in California, has been able to do is potentially leading to nationwide state and federal regulations. They do tend to set a standard right now from that privacy law perspective. So they're a good one to keep an eye on. And they're good to take a look at. And the biggest one up here is the data brokers. So those are companies that collect consumer data and sell it to other companies. So the Equifaxes of the world, the Experians of the world, etc. And their law around the Delete Act doesn't just fine the company for doing something against this act. They fine the company based on the number of users that they happen to have on their system and the number of days before that problem was solved. So if you have 3 million people inside of your database and you're a data broker, 3 million times X number of dollars per day until it gets resolved. So it's huge from a cost perspective and can put a company out of business. Canada, hey, we're here. So a couple of different groups that work with digital ID in Canada. DIAC's one of the big ones. So if you're not familiar with DIAC, please do check them out. They're the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada. They're helping drive regulation, they're helping drive legislation. They're providing information that the government needs in order to make a good decision, as opposed to a decision that worked 3 years ago but doesn't work today. They advocate for an inclusive, privacy-enhancing digital ID as well. Again, equity, fundamentally, at the end of the day. They are committed to developing a Canadian framework for digital identification and authentication so that if I'm in Alberta and I go to BC, my ID will work seamlessly between those two regions. And of course, they want to unlock opportunities for Canadians and decrease the cost for governments. And decreasing the cost for governments is something that should be a huge driver for any association, any company out there. Because in the past, we have seen it time after time after time, and there's been something recently in the news too that I'm not going to talk about, but it's in the news. Governments don't necessarily make the best decisions because they don't have all the information needed to make the best decisions. So it's up to us, working with not-for-profits, working inside of our own companies to make sure that they do have the information that they need to make those decisions. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, so they have a formal joint statement. It is linked here. I'm not going to go into it, but this was talking about data scraping. Social media companies, think Facebook, of course. Everybody thinks Facebook when we talk about social media data scraping, and others. But the amount of times that this mass data scraping is occurring is increasing because the data that you're putting into the social media is typically available to absolutely anybody who wants to get that information. So you can have a private profile all you like. That doesn't mean that people can't be it. It's getting sold, one of the two. So the changing privacy landscape here in Canada, the biggest one is indictment and conviction and the fines associated to it. As I said earlier, here you get a $50 fine and a ticket in the mail and you get to pay it or show up for court, kind of like a speeding ticket. It's a little bit different now. So now, it's $25 million on indictment, $20 million on conviction. So how many startup companies have $25 million lying around to pay off that fine if they happen to get it? And what's more is for the global companies, 5% of your annual gross revenues. Global, not Canada, global gross revenues. And it's whichever is greater, not whichever is less. So if you are at Facebook, that 5% comes into play long before the $25 million fine does. And the $25 million fine is similar to the $50 fine that PETA gives you right now in Canada. C27, as I mentioned earlier, it's privacy and it's AI. It's not separated. The AI piece has become a little bit of a problem in getting this law passed. So until we actually get through the AI section of this bill, this is going to stay in radius and it's going to be continuously updated until such a time as it meets what everybody thinks it should meet from a large language model ChatGPT requirement. But QB recently announced how much they hated the bill, specifically for the AI. The privacy side is good. Not too many people are complaining about the privacy part of the bill. It's the AI part. And it's February 6, 2024. This is very, very new. QB is the union for public employees, so, government employees. That's going to stop it until in such a time it actually gets fixed. Quebec Law 25, as I mentioned, was rolled out. September 22nd of 2023 was phase 2. It is giving the data privacy rules, policies, etc. all the way through. Explicit consent for everything that you're doing online, be it in an app or on a website. And it also forces the right to de-index, so erasure of your data. So if your data is anywhere and you're a Quebec citizen, you have the right to say, remove all of your data. And that's not just from live feeds or live data, it's from the backups too. So the Wayback Time Machine, if you have a MySpace profile from back in the day, if you're as old as I am, it's still out there. I can get to my MySpace profile. Don't, please don't. And of course, default privacy settings are how it's set up by default. There's no longer the big accept button whenever you go into that website. Now it's off by default. You literally have to opt into cookies as opposed to opting out of cookies, which is a big change. Final phase is rolling out in 2024, as I mentioned. This is where data portability comes into play. And this is where decentralized identity is huge because it allows for that portability. Where you have your data, you can control where it's going, and it goes with you throughout your entire lifespan. Europe. EID, and EIDS. EIDS 2.0 was published in 2021, so that's the newest one. And it is for that universal standard around privacy of data and again, your digital identity and how it's being used. They're ahead of us in a lot of cases where the EIUD wallet initiative is already in progress, standards have already been made, these are being released to private sector as well as governments across the EU, and they're being enacted today. Huge market potential, they're expecting this digital identity space in Europe to reach 4.9 billion by 2027, and a lot of this is being driven by all of the governments and private sector coming together to create something that everybody can work on, so that you're no longer disconnected from that perspective. And there's where we are today, 2024, Q1. So the EU DI wallet implementation is just starting. So we're going to see this coming very, very quickly in Europe, and expect to see more of it in the US and Canada, especially as international travel comes into play, and some of these digital identities now need to be portable not just inside of a region, but outside of that region as well. So fundamentally, in summary, identity can affect you as an individual in many different ways. It can affect the jobs that you get, the jobs that you do, the training that you have in order to do them safely, your foundational identity, your access to healthcare in an equitable fashion, your access to other social services that you may need to get access to. So identity is hugely important for many, many different reasons. DIAC is helping to try to bridge that gap between private and public organizations so that we have seamless handover of identity regardless of what you're doing at any given point in time. And the ability to stack those identities in a way that you can now share just pieces of it that are necessary to share when you need to share them. And of course, in the EU, having that harmonized digital identity helps break down a lot of those walls around country-to-country travel and the work associated with it. That's it. I've got a few extra slides inside of this that I wanted everybody to have access to after the fact, but it talks a little bit more about the holder, issuer, verifier as the three folks that need to trust each other. Fundamentally, it's all about trust whenever it comes to identity, be it a physical ID or a digital one. That inherent principle needs to still be there. Verifiable credentials as the standard, and it's multiple standard right now, but as the standard allows that interoperability and portability across region, across jurisdiction, which is super important. Stacking VCs, the other piece. Even though I may be a crane operator, I may not be hired by that company. So if those two things don't marry together, I shouldn't be able to turn on the crane from company X if I happen to be out and about on their job site. But building dependencies on everything from your licensing, my background's in engineering. If I had a professional engineering designation, I shouldn't be able to stamp a drawing or design for a bridge a day after it's been revoked by that body. And in the digital credential space, whenever all three, the issuer, the holder, and the employer, are in constant communication, that's a real-time status update. So no longer can I go out, get a DUI, lose my designation, and stamp something the next day because I didn't tell my employer that, oh, by the way, I happened to get a DUI and lose my license. And fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's going to be a connected ecosystem. Everybody has to play together. Governments need to play together. Private sector needs to play together. But we all need to work together in order to drive an outcome that is equitable, fair, easy to use, and available to all individuals.